Welcome back to another explainer. Today, we're doing a really fascinating deep dive into the very foundation of how businesses actually operate. We're talking organization and management. Whether you're looking at a massive global tech corporation or just a local mid-sized factory down the street, there is this hidden architecture governing everything. It dictates how people are managed, how big decisions are made, and ultimately how the work actually gets done. And today, we are going to decode that entire architecture together. So here is our roadmap for today's corporate blueprint. We'll kick things off with structuring the business, then we'll move into the core functions of management and break down different leadership styles. After that, we'll examine modern working arrangements and finally wrap up with protecting employee rights. All right, let's jump right into section 1, structuring the business. Okay, so before a business can even think about producing a product or making a sale, it needs a structure. Think of it like a macro blueprint. It dictates how the people and the distinct functional areas, things like operations, marketing, finance, human resources, are all physically and logically organized. Now, when we look at that blueprint, one of the first things we measure horizontally is called the span of control. This is actually super simple. It's literally just the number of subordinates working immediately under a single manager. So, for instance, if you're a manager and you have exactly 4 workers directly reporting to you, your span of control is 4. It's just a measure of that horizontal spread within any given department. Now, if the span of control is horizontal, the chain of command is all about how things build vertically. This illustrates exactly how instructions are passed all the way from the very top level down to the newest employees at the bottom. It shows who reports to whom, layer by layer, from the directors down to the managers and finally down to the shop floor staff. When you map this out, you get a really stark visual contrast between a tall hierarchy and a flat hierarchy. A tall hierarchy features a very narrow span of control, meaning a manager only oversees a few people, maybe just 2 or 3. But because of that, it has many, many vertical layers. A flat hierarchy is the exact opposite. It has a really wide span of control, where a single manager might oversee 6, 8, or more people, which results in far fewer vertical layers overall. And, these different shapes aren't just for show. They come with major real-world trade-offs. A flat hierarchy with a short chain of command, that allows for incredibly fast communication from top to bottom. Because one manager oversees so many workers, the staff tend to feel highly empowered and motivated. Plus, the company saves a ton on management costs. On the flip side, a tall hierarchy with a long chain of command offers much closer support and guidance, allowing managers to tightly monitor their teams. And maybe the best part for the employees, with so many vertical layers, there are significantly more opportunities to get promoted up the ladder. Okay, so we've built the structure. We understand the vertical chains and the horizontal spans. But a structure is kind of just a static blueprint until real people step into it, right? Which brings us to a huge question. Who actually runs this engine on a daily basis? That brings us perfectly to section 2, the functions of management. So understanding the structure is one thing, but running it is a whole different ballgame. Management isn't just one big, generic job. It's actually 5 distinct functions. First up is planning, setting the goals and figuring out what resources you need. Second is organizing, making sure the team has exactly what they need and knows what's expected of them. Third is coordinating, ensuring all the different departments are playing nice and working harmoniously together. Fourth is commanding, giving clear directions and orders. And finally, fifth is controlling, which basically means monitoring the actual work to make sure it aligns with the plan and fixing any issues that pop up along the way. Now, a massive part of a manager's organizational function involves something called delegation. This just means giving a subordinate the authority to perform a task on the manager's behalf. And honestly, it's a total win-win. It highly motivates the employee by giving them real responsibility and a chance to prove themselves for a future promotion. And it frees up the manager to focus on high-level strategic decisions instead of just micromanaging everything. But let's be real, some managers are absolutely terrified of delegation. Why? Well, they fear losing control. Or worse, they worry the employee might actually do the job better than them and steal their thunder. Moving right along to section 3, leadership styles. The specific way a manager gives an order can completely alter a company's entire culture. Let's look at 2 very different approaches here. The autocratic style relies completely on one-way communication. The manager simply gives an order and the employees execute it, period. No input. It is incredibly fast and absolutely perfect for crisis situations. Think of an army in the middle of the battle, right? Top management just doesn't have time to sit around and discuss strategy with the soldiers. Conversely, the democratic style uses two-way communication. The leader actually asks for advice and input from the team before making a decision. This builds amazing buy-in and utilizes the team's best ideas. But yeah, it definitely slows down the decision-making process. And then we have the laissez-faire style, which basically translates to a totally hands-off approach. This provides ultimate freedom to the workers. They're told what needs to be achieved, and then they just figure out how to do it themselves. But a quick word of caution here, this style really lacks direction. It generally only works when your workforce is highly experienced, incredibly self-motivated, and working on creative tasks where rigid rules would just stifle their productivity. Otherwise, it can kind of turn into chaos. All right, we've talked a lot about how managers lead, but the whole landscape of where and when people actually do their work is shifting dramatically right now. It really makes you wonder, is the traditional, rigid 9-to-5 schedule at the corporate office officially a thing of the past? Let's explore that in Section 4, Modern Working Arrangements. So let's look at the human element of this business blueprint. Modern arrangements are rapidly moving away from strict office hours toward way more flexibility. Let's break down the reality of flexible and home working. For employees, having flexible hours and ditching that daily commute means a significantly better work-life balance and way lower personal costs, which naturally boosts job satisfaction. For employers, it's a huge win too. Massive savings on overheads like office space, desk setups, heating, plus they tend to retain their employees longer. However, it's not totally perfect. Employees can really suffer from a lack of belonging and serious isolation at home, not to mention all the distractions. And for employers, trying to coordinate teams when everyone is working remotely at completely different times, yeah, that can be a communication nightmare. Beyond just flexible hours, companies also have to balance part-time versus full-time contracts. Part-time employees are highly cost-effective for managing workloads that fluctuate. Like a hotel might hire part-time students specifically to handle the crazy customer rush on the weekends. But part-timers often have limited availability and sometimes less loyalty, especially if they're juggling multiple jobs. Full-time employees, on the other hand, are highly reliable. They're constantly available for teamwork, and they're usually more efficient across a variety of tasks. But, of course, they naturally carry a much higher permanent wage cost for the business. And sometimes, managing those heavy wage costs requires some really tough decisions. Downsizing is when a business permanently reduces the size of its workforce. Now, this isn't usually about poor employee performance. It's typically a long-term strategic move for major cost reduction. It also happens a lot if a business is relocating its operations to a cheaper area, or, and we see this all the time now, if they are shifting to automation. If they bring in capital-intensive machinery, human workers are simply no longer needed to do those specific jobs. Which leads us to a specific term you really need to understand: redundancy. Redundancy is when an employee is let go strictly because their role is no longer needed. Maybe demand dropped, or maybe robots took over the assembly line. It is absolutely vital to understand that this is not due to any fault or poor performance by the employee. Because it isn't their fault, workers who are made redundant are usually given a redundancy payment as a form of financial compensation to help them out. But how do managers actually decide who stays and who goes when they're forced to downsize a whole department? Well, there's a step-by-step logic they follow. First, they look at the length of employment. They generally want to keep their most loyal staff. Then they look at skills and experience, making sure to retain the folks crucial for the company's future success. They'll also check attendance and performance records. And finally, they might just ask for voluntary redundancy, basically letting go of employees who are actively willing to take that compensation payout and leave entirely on their own terms. Okay, with all this talk of management control, rigid hierarchies, and restructuring, it really begs a massive question. When a business holds so much power over hours, wages, and job security, who is actually out there advocating for the individual worker? And that brings us to our final stop today, Section 5, Protecting Employee Rights. This is where we look at organizations built purely to support and protect the workforce. Let's talk about the absolutely critical role of trade unions in the business ecosystem. A trade union is an organization that represents employees and negotiates with business owners on their behalf. Think about it. If you go to your boss all by yourself to ask for better conditions, you have very little leverage. But trade unions operate on the whole power and numbers concept. They negotiate better wages, better health, and better safety conditions for everyone. They provide serious legal support during disputes. And if negotiations completely break down, they hold the ultimate card. They have the power to organize strikes. That's where workers collectively stop working entirely to put massive pressure on the employers to finally listen to their demands. Wow, okay, we have journeyed all the way from the rigid charts of a tall hierarchy down to the flexible hours of a remote worker and right through to the collective power of trade unions. It's a lot of information to process, but understanding this corporate blueprint really does change how you view the entire working world. Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final thought to reflect on. Considering the fast-paced autocratic style, the collaborative democratic style, or the totally free laissez-faire style, which leadership style would you personally thrive under? Think about it. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember to keep questioning how the engines around you are run. Catch you next time.